Hello, this is укрлайф TV, and we continue our broadcasting from Kyiv. And our guest today is teacher of international relations of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, Mridula Ghosh. Mridula, hello, thank you very much to be with us today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me over.
Thank you. Mridula, recently in your column for the Times of India, you raised the issue of relationship between India and Ukraine. Let's go back to that topic and talk about this relationship in dynamic, if it is possible. Of course, I understand that it is a very long history, but nevertheless, maybe key points. But telling that, I'm not sure that it is a long story, because you wrote that the last Indian prime minister to visit Ukraine was Indira Gandhi in 1982.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Well, you know, the issue is it was USSR then. It was not Ukraine. We have to understand that the relations between different parts of the world, territories, it is always following some course of history. And if you talk about relations between this part of the world and India, we should not limit ourselves only to this period, the post-independence period, or even the Soviet period. I would say even the history goes back much more, you know, in the 18th century or 17th or even 19th century. It's not very well studied, of course, but records that follow is the interstate relations, which we think of in terms of politics, international politics. Then definitely there were relationships between Tsarist Russia, which Ukraine was a part of Ukraine was part of Tsarist Russia, and British India. There had been relations, and which is very interesting also, because there are records which show that the Tsar used to visit Far East by going the sea route, and he stopped in India for some hunting. Why didn't he take the land route? Because the Trans-Siberian Railway was not existing that time. So we have a lot of records which are fascinating, and I believe that scholars will study and, you know, detail on it. However, when the Soviet period started, it was different because India was a colony, and the relationship started basically after India became independent. That's the way, you know, we modern historians or international relations expert, we take it from there. The cutoff date is after 1947, when India becomes independent, and it builds its relationship not as a colony, a part of a bigger, you know, entity like British India, but as an independent state. Similarly, there is a valid, you know, it is not wrong that Ukraine also tries to build its relations with countries from 1991 when it announced independence. But I would, for the sake of analysis, not limit it to 1991, but go back, because a large part of relationship was established when it was the Soviet period. Ukraine as part of Soviet Union cannot neglect and cannot throw away. That's what I say, because it is important to mention that Prime Minister is the main the main leader. We are a parliamentary democracy. So we have had presidents coming to Ukraine. We had 2 presidential visits. Unfortunately, in all the 33 years, we didn't have more. It was Dr. Shankar Dayal Sharma in 1993, and then it was in 2005. You know, it was Professor Abdul Kalam, a famous scientist who was our president that time. Yes, the relations have been very difficult. I would say it was from both sides. It was not so, you know, activized. It was going on, you know, as I wrote, it was more on bureaucratic inertia rather than it was on a very energizing thing. Because you know very well, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the whole world, you know, focuses on Russia and the other republics. This is the verbal terminology often used, you know, that you have 14 other countries, 14 sovereign countries coming up. And, you know, so everything that happened and Soviet times, everything goes to Russia's credit, which is not good, because in terms of scientific engineering potential, Ukraine was one of the top republics. And in fact, I would say Ukraine even led in certain sectors, especially in defense and space technology. Otherwise, Ukraine could not be the third largest power carrying the arsenal which it had to give up in the Budapest Memorandum. So you have to have the scientific potential behind such a big sector. And the defense cooperation that started between India and Soviet Union in 1971 after they concluded the Treaty of Peace, when we had the war regarding Bangladesh, and there was a very, very difficult situation when we had Pakistan, China against us, and also the United States. It supported Pakistan more. So we had to sort of, like Indira Gandhi was sort of, had to seek some assistance to ask for help, and it was the Soviet Union which came and signed the treaty. Of course, I would say that you cannot blame Indian leaders for becoming pro-Soviet. It was dictated by history and circumstances, So I believe that that was the time when Cold War and all countries had to choose something. We are non-aligned, but at that point, I believe after this signing of the treaty, the non-aligned were a little bit tilted towards the Soviet bloc, many countries, because it was more of this historical anti-West, anti-colonial standpoint from which, we positioned ourselves. India positions itself in many countries, even today. So from that standpoint, Ukraine aligning with the West was stereotypically understood as something like Ukraine is going towards the West and Russia is Russia. So, and we have the traditional relations. This is the rhetoric. This is the explanation used by most analysts, most policymakers, that we cannot, there is no trade-off. Russia is there and we have our defense supplies, whatever. However, India opens embassies, establishes diplomatic relations with most of these 14 republics, most of them, not all, because Moldova has no Indian embassy, but from Romania it works. And so Ukraine has an embassy from the very, very start. It is India is one of the countries which recognized, and President Kravchuk visited in March or February 1992, I think. And 1993, we had our president come. So the relations were really dynamic. And I believe a little bit of thaw came when there was this deal, Pakistan tank deal in 1997, and there was a big, discontent in Ukraine about that, and also the nuclear test that followed in 1998. So Ukraine being a nuclear-free nation, it also protested. So the two things made the relations a bit colder. However, from there, afterwards, President Kuchma visited in 2002. After that, he started a lot. There is a realization that we are not exploiting the full potential of our relations. This is understood by everybody, but how and where and when to do is a big question. So the fact that we can do more is clear. And this realization became even more today, because as we understand, the whole dynamic of global security architecture literally changed after, in fact, it started changing slowly after Russia attacked Georgia, and then when it follows with the occupation of Crimea and fomenting the war in Donbass. And after that, when in 2022, the things just went berserk, I would say, everything was so unexpected, but I believe that this is a situation which India finds itself in a bit difficult position, because on one hand it has this alignment, some kind of they call it friendship, the friendship with Russia, but I would call it a relationship with Russia. Let me not use these words like friendship because it's a very emotional term. So it tries to balance. It is trying to balance, but you will notice a lot of changes are happening. And for that, I will detail maybe later if you have any other question on the historical part. One of the things that was neglected by Ukraine was this, two things happened. One is this overall neglect to global South, because we were focusing Ukraine.
If you say global neglect, what does it mean?
No, not global neglect. Neglect towards global South.
Global South, sorry, yeah.
Because you see, Ukraine positions itself as historically, as a member of the global north. It wants to have European integration and NATO. So it was Europe focused. And you even know that there was this very strange attitude of people in the media talking about, oh, we are Europeans, we are not Asians, So I was often feeling very, strange that, Asia is very big, and Japanese are Asians, and Singaporeans are Asians, and even the Saudi Arabians are Asians, So Asia was treated as a second grade kind of something, because maybe there are different levels of democracy. There are different systems that are working. However, to generalize and say that, we are Europeans, we are not Asians. Asia, the word Asia was used as a not very positive term. However, this awakening of, I would say, this consciousness or, the raising the awareness about Global South came when Ukraine had to seek international support. And of course, you cannot just go on knocking at the doors. Internationally, the United Nations platform has been a very successful one. The General Assembly is time and again voting with few countries supporting Russia. However, in general, there's a very, except specialists who work there, except those ambassadors who work there, except people with deep knowledge of language, I don't find very good knowledge about the Global South and how to talk to them. I mean, you cannot just go to a leader or to a country and say that, well, you support us. They would say, why? On what ground? Yes, you have a genocide, definitely. Humanly, we understand, but we have ties with Russia, And then we have that counter propaganda that, this is a war not between Ukraine and Russia, it is a war between NATO and Russia. So this is that, you are with a warring bloc, we don't know what you are doing, you are being pushed by the West to fight. This is another rhetoric, another campaign that goes on in these countries. So with all these, there is a realization that has come to Ukraine that we must change the things. Today, if you talk about relations with Global South, how you approach the anti-colonial wave, that is, Ukrainians have started looking into their past and analyzing that there has been a lot of colonialism in its history. It's not the racism and the type of colonialism that the West and the East had between the West and, the other countries, but it is a kind of a social colonialism, assimilation policy, getting rid of all identities. That was what was the Russian colonialism looked like, Tsarist colonialism. How much of that colonialism survived during Soviet times is something that scholars have studied. However, these studies didn't enter into the area of foreign policy. Now it is entering, and now we are talking about it. So, which is very interesting. So on this point, I think there is a lot to be told to the Indian society, and Indians could realize that there were similar things happening. It's not that Russia is a friend or an enemy, but there were things that were happening. That's more important to say. That, you cannot be blind to all the activities of a friend, even if you call that a friend. This is not correct. So the truth must be told, and then all attempts to mask the truth also must be, revealed and said. So there is a lot of work to be done, not necessarily just by diplomatic talks or by politicians, but a lot of work to be done academically between the academic world of the Global South and Ukraine. And of course, in this, we have scholars who study and who deal with these issues in Western universities. Here we have this, the challenge can be met. It's not that difficult. However, it will take time.
Mridula, Prime Minister Modi publicly told Putin that it is not a time of war. And in that case, what do you think could be the role of India in stopping Russia's unprovoked.
Yes, that was a very stellar statement by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and everybody. It went everywhere. Everybody said that on the face of Putin. He said it. He uttered it, and he said it in Hindi, and it was correctly translated. He said exactly this. So it means that we do not advocate the war. We are not in support of the war. That is clear. And we are not in support. The Indian government is not supporting the war, and it is preferring some diplomatic negotiations. It has been telling this for already more than 1 year, and from the very beginning. In fact, there's nothing new about it. On the other hand, it had to enter into different arrangements for, I would say, on one hand, to keep ties with Russia, but also to distance from Russia. It had to do because the time requires doing that. I would say that till today we did not have, Narendra Modi did not meet President Putin in the annual summit. It was cancelled in December 2022. Then you see there had been so many occasions in Hiroshima he didn't meet. In the BRICS, I don't remember, but Mr. Putin, I think he spoke via video cable. I think this.
Yes, it's true. Yeah.
So there were no personal meetings really, other than the one in Samarkand last autumn, like a year before. So I don't remember them meeting face to face. But on the other hand, Mr. Modi has received a lot of leaders from other parts of the world. Giorgia Meloni, for example, Macron was a guest, and it is reaching out to global leaders, not because it wants to distance from Russia or come close to Ukraine, but in its own right, because Prime Minister Modi understands that India is needed by other powers today, because of the rising, as they would perceive, the threat or the emergence of China and the close relationships between China and Russia. For that reason, India's potential is now getting more and more attention. And so this diplomatic and political attention is important. And I believe that even Ukrainians have realized it long ago. And that during the COVID times also, and during all the time, businesses have been expanding. Trade between our countries increased. And of course, it can have more. And now, as you know, just 2 days back, the Ukrainian ambassador, newly appointed, he made a statement. He organized a nice round table, and I participated. I was very happy to see that. He's very active. And he invited the Ukrainian private sector to participate in the reconstruction. And also they created an Indo-Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce, and they signed a memorandum. So there are things happening on the ground, and diplomatically they are working to create the frameworks that are needed to bring the two nations together. This is not just talking to the leaders talking to leaders. It's one way. But like you see, we may not have the relations between people to people is so deep between India and countries of the West. For example, I mean, you see, you have a lot of the big diasporas are there in United States, in Canada, in Great Britain, the English-speaking countries, and you have a lot of people that are members of the ruling party or the opposition party among the elite in those societies, and who are of Indian origin. I mean, you get me what I mean, that Rishi Sunak has both Pakistan and India origin. Kamala Harris is having an Indian, half Indian origin. So many people are there, and Harjit Sajjan in Canada and many other people are there. So this is something that there is a lot of human capital in those countries that happen because of people-to-people exchange, healthy migration, and those other things, which is not there between the post-Soviet space and India. That is not there. But despite it, relations can happen. But I still will stress on people-to-people relations, which is something that should be increased, because businesses is fine. But I think understanding both countries, you need people-to-people relationship. And that is not so strong today.
Mridula, let's back to the situation when leaders talking to leaders, and because we know that the next G20 will start on the 9th of September in India, and it is a very interesting situation because you say that India has ties with Russia, but nevertheless, Putin will not come to this summit, and the leader of China will not come to this meeting. What does it mean? Of course, I understand that Ukraine is not invited to participate in this meeting. We know about that, but nevertheless, it is a very interesting situation where when no Putin, no Xi, and no Ukraine. And do you think that it is something which is close connecting, or no? It's or maybe it is a separate story for all of.
Well, all of these are very separate stories. They are not connected, unfortunately or fortunately. Ukraine was not invited. This is something I personally didn't like because I'm in Ukraine and I wanted Ukraine to be there. And I had mentioned it in one of my columns about that. But, you know, the problem is that the government was wary that if we invite Ukraine, then there will be no joint declaration, which every summit wants to have a healthy joint declaration. The Bali summit declaration, as you remember, the third and the fourth point, 2 points, 2 paragraphs were on Ukraine. And India, in fact, helped drafting those 2 paragraphs. It was India's big role India played in doing that. It was accepted by both Russia and China, and they speak about war and aggression and everything. It was very surprising. But then they backed out from all the other ministerial meetings that lead to this summit, because for a whole year we had a lot of ministerial meetings. And in March, when we had the Ministry of Foreign Affairs level meetings of Ministries of Foreign Affairs, at that, the China and Russia, they protested. They said, we don't vote for these 2 points. So the ministerial summit then included these 2 paragraphs with a mark, a clear mark that these 2 paragraphs are voted by everybody except Russia and China. So that is how it was, you know, used. So this kind of a thing to avoid to have a general, and of course the Indian argument was the Indian minister Jai Shankar, Minister of Foreign External Affairs, he said that it's an economic forum, just don't bring politics into it, you know, because there is no other argument to say why you are not inviting Ukraine. Definitely, Ukraine's issue is not economic now, although after war and even the damages of the war has a very big economic component. But however, the issues in the G20 are not related definitely directly to the war. That's for sure. However, I believe that inviting Ukraine, as I said, that it would have added, you know, a feather, a bigger feather in the cap, because then India would look like it is inviting Ukraine. It is not yielding to pressure from Russia and China, because everybody said that it is because of Russia and China you didn't invite Ukraine. That is the normal, you know, perception. Now you see what is happening is Russia is not participating at the presidential level, and this is very important because if Putin had come, then, you know, it could have been even worse because a lot of boycott could have been there. Boycott by many leaders.
You mean from Western leaders, you mean?
Yeah? Western and many others. You know, we don't know. I don't know which leader will boycott, which leader will not, but there could be. So the whole summit may fall apart. That was a bigger risk. Inviting Ukraine might be bad for Russia and China. But you see, even without inviting Ukraine, they already delinked themselves from the summit in a way that their representatives will be there, but not at the summit level, the highest level. So Putin's not coming maybe is due to the factors that there had been probably a lot of these diplomatic thought or other things. So this is, I think, a very big dent and very big work of diplomacy that he's not attending. Perhaps for internal factors that he has a lot of problems at home. The security problems at home, like, the basically air flying security and all those very simple things. However, you have also China not coming. Now, why did that happen? Because Xi Jinping was supposed to come. It just happened a few days back that they were showing maps to different, when he was in the BRICS forum. And the map showed part of our Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh and another Aksai Chin part as part of China, and also some parts of Russia. So this kind of thing had been very, very enraged. It caused some disappointment. Although Chinese said that this is an exercise of sovereignty and don't take it seriously, even our ministry said we don't take it seriously. But showing a map doesn't mean anything until and unless something happens. So they tried to cover it up that way. But ultimately, Xi is not coming. This is for sure, although it is not officially announced. He'll be represented by Yang Li, who is coming for the first time to India. So again, there was a hope, probably. There was a hope, I believe, that a bigger focus being on China in the perspective of Asia. As you know, the summit is happening in Asia. So you have all the Asian departments of foreign ministries of all the countries working hard. And for them, the Asian platform is more dominated by the Chinese emergence, the Chinese perspective, not the Ukraine. If the forum was happening in Europe, then the territorial focus changes. It's very simple. So you had the China focus, and in that, the attempt could have been that if there is a meeting between President Biden and Xi, then there could be some kind of a de-escalation or a kind of something, which was very important for the world. Because for India, as I understand, we are more wary about China, and Indian government is not interested in China becoming more powerful than Russia, dominating. So in that case, it will be very dangerous for India. So, it is going towards that. Unfortunately, the Indians are realizing that it is already going towards that and it will be happening. But however, perhaps they try to somehow stop it, like Russia is getting weakened. And this weakening of Russia will lead to some strengthening of China, which might be very difficult for India. So that is the equation. It is not against Ukraine per se, It is not against Ukraine or especially targeted against Ukraine. But it is difficult to understand at the same time, when you say this is not an era of war, and you don't invite the country which has become the biggest victim in 21st century with terrible losses of human lives, property, infrastructure, and everything. So I believe that could have been a very serious political gesture. And that could have brought a lot of dividend to Prime Minister Modi in case even Ukraine was given a small platform just to speak on video, just as it happened in Bali, not inviting Ukraine personally, but at least some platform, if it could be accommodated. I believe that it would have been better. But unfortunately, I'm not making policies, and it's only my subjective viewpoint.
You say about the possible meeting among Biden and Xi during this summit, G20, but now it is understandable that it is impossible. Biden makes some comments on that and says that he will meet with Xi somewhere. Sometime.
Yes,
yeah, but he says that he is ready. But nevertheless, do you think that it could be a problem for de-escalation among global South and West countries because Xi not come for this summit, or it absolutely doesn't mean that?
What I believe is that look at what happened in BRICS. It's early to analyze. It's very early. We have to still monitor developments and then come to conclusions. Standing with you today, right now, what we see is BRICS. The BRICS forum happened with this BRICS expansion of including different countries. They are telling that it was in the interests of China. So to build the economic architecture of an alternative kind of currency or bank or whatever, Russia and China are more focusing on the BRICS. So it could be that G20, they are not attaching equal importance as an economic forum. This is the only reason why they are not attaching that much importance. And she understands that this could be this not coming is not a big problem because the trade and everything is going on. This is just a gesture to show that probably the importance that was attached, we put more importance to BRICS than to this one. So the attempt to distance is clearly visible, little bit at least. I'm not ready to like speculate or talk about things which is still to happen. We cannot say. Let the summit happen, and after the summit, I think we can come to some conclusions looking at the document that will come. Also, Italy yesterday backed out from the Belt and Road Initiative because the Giorgia Meloni said that it is not in the interests of Italy. It backed out. So you see the Belt and Road Initiative, as you know about China, uniting all the countries of the world. This is the One World, One Dream. Which started from the Olympic slogan in 2008, and they started it. So this Belt and Road Initiative is important for China, and countries dropping out of it is a problem. And of course, a tension between India and China escalation will also be very bad, and which we should try all channels to just, stop it. Now, in this, I'm not sure what is going to happen, but if the Russian territories are marked as China and Indian territories also, there is a common interest of, protesting. But please look into it that Malaysia protested, everybody else protested against the map. Many other third countries protested against this map, which showed the Indian territories as Chinese. But I didn't find Russia protesting officially. We have to check. I'm not going to tell you not true.
No, they not protested officially. They just say, today I just read about that. They just say it's technical, absolutely technical, and as a comment.
Okay, so that is also very interesting observation. Yes,
absolutely, yeah. About the common interests, yeah, I think it is very interesting because you say that India not interested in the strengthening of China, because it will be a problem for India. Does it mean that India could be a very good alliance for Western countries?
Absolutely. India is slowly, it is strengthening its ties with the West. It understands, not because it wants to enjoy any dividend. India is needed today because India is stronger. India is much stronger than Russia, demographically, intellectually, and in all ways, very well. So India is not threatened by any country today. That is what I feel. Although India has its weaknesses inside, we still have a lot of problems. I will not be able to enumerate them to you. However, from the point of economic growth, from the point of potential, it is looking at the future, and no other power in Asia is placed in that sense as a democratic state, which the Western powers can feel comfortable to align with, because India remains a democracy. Despite all what is happening, there are a lot of problems. I don't want to enumerate because there are serious problems. And also, by the way, we have elections in 2024, as much as President Biden faces elections.
So too many elections in 2024.
Yes, 2024 is a year of elections. So this is another point, that for Prime Minister Modi, the exercise of G20 Summit is also very, it's not only a personal political challenge also.
Mridula, it was very interesting thoughts in your article for the Times of India. You say that about the hard road to reshaping relationship between Russia and India. I like this, term reshaping. And at the beginning of our interview, you said that for India, it is a very interesting situation because India needs to keep ties with Russia and keep distance from Russia. It is very, very complicated position. Let's speak about this reshaping. What do you think? How it could look like in nearest time?
I believe it's, of course, I'm thinking, I'm not able to support it with facts, but the relationship that has been between Russia and India has been more towards cooperation of defense and government based. People to people relationship is marginal. I think that, the moment Russia gets more democratic, Russia changes, that will be a bigger hope for India, rather than Russia becoming a second shadow power behind China. So to that extent, it is very difficult to see that transformation happening today. But in the future, I still believe that the democratic leaders, the future leaders of Russia, will definitely have a better dialogue with India. They can share a better dialogue because I believe that the policymakers in India clearly understand the problems with Russian governance, as the authoritarianism and the clampdown of the press and everything else, although publicly they do not issue any statements because that is interfering in their internal matters. So I do believe that democratic Russia, normal Russia, let's say, as from standpoint of Ukraine, will be a healthy option for the whole world. But when will that happen? And also the reshaping, I mean, is that if you think that there are like two big countries which had been born out of empires. One is the Chinese Empire of the ancient dynasties, and then it went through the revolution, and then it expanded. So the same way it happened in Russia, like it was the Tsarist Empire, and then the revolution, and then it expanded. So, and these empires had been very imperial, and they had their ways of colonial legacy. These colonial legacies never went away. So these two countries were never properly decolonized in that sense. So when we look at Russia, we look at it as Russia, ethnic Russians. We have to focus and see that Russia is made up of different ethnicities. And there are many people residing in Russia: the Bashkirs, the Buryats, the Kalmyki, and you name it, a lot of people. And so each of those identities and their history, their ways, so what is it the Russian governance should change, and how will it change? And whether Russia will remain in its current frontiers, current territorial frontiers, we do not know. So all countries, and I think India especially, will be quietly watching that, to happen. How much, traumatic it gets, that depends on the circumstances. But what really happens to Russia will be very important also for the world in that sense, the future. But right now, I would say, my personal attention, happens to Ukraine first, because this war should stop, and, Ukraine should get a just and proper peace. And only then comes the turn for Russia.
Mridula, thank you very much to be with us today. Thank you.
Thank you for calling me in. Thank you.
Thank you. Mridula Ghosh is our guest today, and thank you very much for her. And stay with us. It was укрлайф TV.